At 4 o'clock in the morning, Jodi Huisentruit was still alive. We know that because she answered the phone. She was supposed to be at work already. Jodi was the morning and noon anchor at KIMT-TV in Mason City, Iowa. And like most morning news people, her day started while the rest of the city was still asleep. But on June 27th, 1995, she didn't show up at the station. A coworker called her apartment and Jodi answered. She sounded like she'd overslept. She said she'd be right in, and from that call, there was no obvious sign that anything was wrong beyond the fact that she was late. Then she never arrived. A few hours later, police went to her apartment complex. Her red Mazda Miata was still in the parking lot. Her personal items were scattered nearby. Her red dress shoes were there. Her blow dryer was there. Hairspray, earrings, car keys, a bent key were all found near the vehicle. There were signs of a struggle, but Jodi was gone. No ransom call followed. No confirmed sighting came in that solved it. No body was found. No one has ever been convicted. Just a young news anchor on her way to work before sunrise, disappearing from the parking lot outside her own apartment. And more than 30 years later, the question is still painfully simple. What happened to Jodi Huisentruit? Jodi Sue Huisentruit was 27 years old when she vanished. She was from Minnesota, but by 1995, she was working in Mason City, Iowa as a morning and noon anchor and producer at KIMT-TV. That job meant her day started at an hour most people would still call the middle of the night. Her regular arrival time at the station was around 3:30 a.m. And when your job starts that early, your life begins to run on a very specific rhythm. You wake up before the sun. You get ready while the apartment is quiet. You walk out to your car while most of the complex is still asleep. You drive the same route to the same building, and then the next day, you do it all over again. That kind of routine can feel safe because it's familiar, but it can also become visible. If someone pays attention long enough, they can learn when you leave, where you park, and when the world around you is quiet enough that very few people are watching. On the morning of June 27, 1995, Jodi didn't arrive at KIMT when she was supposed to. Around 4 a.m., a producer at the station called her apartment. Jodi picked up. She reportedly sounded like someone who overslept. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't whispering, and she didn't say someone was inside her apartment. From that call alone, there was no clear sign that she was in immediate danger. She was late. She knew she was late, and she told her coworker she'd be right in. That one phone call anchors the entire case because it proves that at 4 a.m., Jodi was still alive, inside her apartment and close enough to work that everyone expected her to arrive quickly. But she didn't. The morning show still had to happen because television doesn't stop easily. Someone still had to sit at the desk. Someone still had to get through the broadcast. Viewers watching from home may not have known anything was wrong yet. But inside the station, concern was growing with every passing minute. Jodi had answered the phone. she said she was coming in. She was only a few minutes away, and still she never walked through the door. At 7:13 that morning, a coworker called police and asked for a welfare check. 3 minutes later, an officer arrived at Jodi's apartment complex, and that's when this stopped looking like a late employee and started looking like something much worse. Jodi's red Mazda Miata was still in the parking lot. She hadn't driven away. She hadn't made it to work. She hadn't even gotten out of the apartment complex. Around the car, police found the kind of scene that doesn't look like someone simply changed plans. Her red women's dress shoes were near the vehicle. Her blow dryer was there. A bottle of hairspray was there. Her earrings were there. Her car keys were there. And one of those keys was bent. That detail matters because a bent key suggests force. It suggests the key may have been in the door lock when something happened. Maybe Jodi was unlocking the car. Maybe she was close enough to leaving that she thought she was only seconds away from getting inside the vehicle and heading to work. But she never got in. Investigators saw signs of a struggle, and they searched the area around the apartment complex. They also searched nearby places, including areas around the Winnebago River. From the beginning, the scene didn't point toward Jodi walking away voluntarily. Her car was still there. Her belongings were scattered, and everything about the parking lot suggested her normal morning routine had been violently interrupted. That's one of the most haunting parts of this case. The parking lot tells us something happened, but doesn't tell us enough. It tells us there was panic, it tells us there was a struggle, and it tells us Jodi was taken or forced away just feet from her car. But it doesn't tell us who was there with her. It doesn't tell us where she was taken. And it doesn't tell us why someone would risk abducting a local news anchor outside her own apartment at an hour when people were already expecting her somewhere else. Part of what makes Jodi's disappearance so unsettling is that she wasn't hidden from the community. She was visible, recognizable, and part of the daily life of Mason City. People saw her on TV. They heard her voice in the morning. They knew her face, her smile, and the way she carried herself on air. That kind of visibility creates a strange kind of closeness because viewers can feel like they know a news anchor simply because they see them every day. But seeing someone on TV isn't the same thing as knowing them. Jodi was a real person with a private life, but to the public, she was also a familiar face. In a smaller city, that can matter. A local anchor may not be famous in the Hollywood sense, but she can still become familiar enough that strangers feel connected to her. Someone might see her at a store, at a restaurant, at an event, or just around town and feel like there's already a relationship there, even if Jodi wouldn't have known them at all. That's one of the dangers of public visibility. It can make a stranger feel close. Then there's the schedule. Jodi had to leave for work early. She had to walk from her apartment to her car in the dark. She had to do it while the parking lot was quiet and most people weren't awake. That doesn't prove someone watched her, and it doesn't prove the attack was planned, but it does explain why investigators and people who have followed this case have always looked closely at her routine. Did someone know when she normally left for work? Was someone waiting? Was she targeted? Or was this a chance encounter in the worst possible place at the worst possible time? Those questions lead to very different versions of this case. A target attack points towards someone who knew her, watched her, followed her, or became fixated on her. A random attack points towards opportunity, darkness, and brutal timing. After more than 30 years, the public record still doesn't give us enough to say which one is true. The last known contact with Jodi was that 4 a.m. phone call, and it gives the morning a tight frame. Before the call, Jodi was inside her apartment and alive. After that call, she was expected to leave quickly. Somewhere between that phone call and the discovery of the parking lot scene, something happened. The window was small. Jodi woke up late, answered the phone, realized she had to get to work, and started moving through a routine she had probably done hundreds of times before. She gathered what she needed, left the apartment, and headed toward her car. Then the day ended before it began. That's what makes this case feel so close. Jodi wasn't missing for hours before anyone realized something was wrong. She had a job where her absence mattered immediately. People were waiting on her. She had a live broadcast to get to. When she didn't arrive, the concern started fast. That should have helped. And in some ways, it did. It gave investigators a clear morning. It preserved a basic timeline. It brought police to the apartment complex within a few hours, but it still wasn't enough. By the time officers found the car, Jodi was already gone. One of the most important things in this case is knowing the difference between what's documented and what became part of a legend around it. Over the years, people have talked about screams, a white van, palm prints, DNA, secret relationships, suspicious behavior, and persons of interest. Some of those details have been publicly reported. Some have been disputed. Some have changed as investigators clarified what they did and didn't believe. So this episode is going to keep the line clear. The core facts are already disturbing enough. Jodi didn't make it to work. She answered the phone and she said she was coming. Her car was found at her apartment. Her belongings were scattered around it. There were signs of a struggle, and she was never found. You don't have to add anything to that to make it terrifying. One of the most discussed details in Jodi's case is a reported white van. A witness reportedly saw a white van near Jodi's car around the time she disappeared. Investigators searched for that van and tried to identify who it belonged to, but the public has never been given a clean answer that closes that part of the story. That detail has stayed with the case because it feels like it could explain something. A van could explain how someone got Jodi away from the parking lot quickly. Could explain why her car was still there. It could explain how an abduction happened in a public apartment complex without Jodi ever making it onto the road. But it could also be nothing. It could be a vehicle that happened to be nearby. Could be a witness memory that never led anywhere solid. Could be one of those details that feels important because the case is still unsolved. That's the problem with the cold case. A detail can be a clue, or it can be a shadow. And until there's an answer, people keep staring at the shadow. There were also reports of sounds from the parking lot around the time Jodi vanished. Residents later described hearing a commotion, muffled noise, or a woman crying out. And if those reports are connected, they suggest Jodi may have fought back. That part is awful because it means whoever took her didn't stop when the situation became loud. They didn't run away when she resisted. They didn't abandon the attack because it was risky. They continued. That says something about the person responsible. Even if it doesn't tell us their name, it suggests commitment, risk tolerance, and a willingness to attack a woman in an apartment parking lot before sunrise with people close by. That doesn't feel casual, but feeling isn't proof. When a case begins with a violent scene but no body, no ransom, and no confirmed direction of travel, investigators are left with two paths at the same time. They have to look outward at strangers, vehicles, and opportunity, while also looking inward at the people close enough to know her routine. No one has ever been convicted in Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance, and that has to stay at the center of this case. Over the years, names have been discussed publicly. Some people were looked at because they knew Jodi. Some were looked at because of criminal histories. Some were looked at because of tips. But a person of interest is not the same thing as a guilty person. One name that has long been connected to the public discussion is John Vansence. Vansence was a friend of Jodi's, and he has been described in public reporting as a person of interest. He reportedly said he was one of the last people to see Jodi alive. He was never charged in connection with her disappearance. That distinction matters because someone can be investigated because they were close to the victim. Someone can be questioned because they were part of the last known timeline. Someone can seem important to investigators, but unless charges are filed and a case is proven, suspicion is still not proof. The fact is this: John was never convicted of taking Jodi. Another name that has come up in public discussion is Tony Jackson, a convicted serial rapist who lived in Mason City around the time Jodi disappeared. Investigators looked into him, but publicly, law enforcement has not said he was responsible for Jodi's disappearance. That's another frustrating piece because he fits certain fears people have about the case. A predator, a stranger, a violent offender, someone who could make sense inside a stranger abduction theory. But fitting a theory isn't the same as fitting the evidence. That's why Jodi's case has lasted so long in public discussion. There are multiple paths that seem possible, but none that have publicly closed the case. It could have been someone she knew, could have been someone who watched her, could have been someone passing through. The white van could matter, or it could be one more unanswered detail in a case full of them. And for decades, investigators kept returning to the same problem. They had a scene that looked violent. They had a victim who vanished almost immediately after a confirmed phone call. But they didn't have the one thing that could end the case. They didn't have Jodi. Jodi's disappearance became one of the most covered investigations in Mason City history. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation and the FBI became involved. Tips came in. Searches happened. Media attention grew. The case became national. And because Jodi was a news anchor, her disappearance carried another layer. The media wasn't just covering a missing woman, they were covering one of their own. But attention doesn't always equal answers. That's one of the hardest things about cases like this. People assume that a big case means there must be enough evidence somewhere, but sometimes a big case just means thousands of people are staring at the same empty space. Jodi's remains have never been found, and the person responsible has never been publicly identified and brought to justice. Because of that, every new tip gets weighed against decades of grief. A lead comes in, a search happens, hope rises, and then the answer still doesn't come. That's been the rhythm of this case for more than 30 years. In recent years, renewed attention came through documentaries, reporting, and continued work from people who have kept Jodi's name alive. Searches have still happened. New claims have still surfaced. Old questions have still come back around. One search brought investigators back to Winstead, Minnesota. Law enforcement searched a location connected to a lead, including an area where a house had recently been torn down. A trained dog was used, machinery was brought in, and investigators dug in areas of interest. Nothing was found. That kind of update feels both important and crushing. It matters because investigators were still looking, but it hurts because another possible answer disappeared into the dirt. For Jodi's family, friends, and former co-workers, that's the cruelty of a cold case. It doesn't just freeze a moment in time. It keeps reopening it again and again. One of the clearest signs that investigators were still actively working this case came years after Jodi disappeared. In 2017, police sought GPS tracking connected to vehicles associated with John Vanson's. By then, more than 2 decades had passed since Jodi vanished, but investigators were still looking for movement, patterns, and anything that could point them somewhere new. The public portion of that GPS report doesn't read like a dramatic confession. It reads like data. Date, time, speed, heading, park time, estimated address, latitude, longitude, stop after stop, row after row. The visible points show movement from Iowa through Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and into Arizona. It doesn't look like random wandering across back roads. From the locations shown, it appears to follow a fairly direct interstate route toward Phoenix, including repeated stops along the I-40 corridor. That matters because it keeps the report in perspective. The GPS data doesn't publicly show some secret route into the middle of nowhere. It shows a long drive across major highways, then a cluster of local movement once the device reached the Phoenix area. But the reason investigators would use GPS that many years later is still important. They may have been looking for behavior. They may have wanted to know whether pressure, memory, fear, or contact from law enforcement would make someone go somewhere meaningful. In a cold case, a person who knows something might visit a burial site, a storage location, an old property, or someone else connected to the case. They might move differently after police contact. They might make a call, take a trip, or return to a place that suddenly matters. That doesn't mean the GPS report proved anything. It means investigators were still trying, and that's the point. Years after Jodi vanished, law enforcement wasn't only looking backward at old interviews and old evidence. They were still watching movement in real time, hoping that something in the present might lead back to what happened in 1995. But publicly, that GPS tracking did not solve the case. It did not lead to an arrest. It did not bring Jodi home. It became one more piece of a long investigation that kept moving without reaching the answer everyone wanted.
A potential breakthrough in a decades-long cold case. An Iowa private investigator claiming he's learned who is responsible for Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance.
In 2026, private investigator Steve Ridge publicly claimed he had identified a potential suspect in Jodi's disappearance. According to reporting, Ridge said he had spoken with a woman who had a relationship with the potential suspect shortly after Jodi vanished. Ridge said the woman described the man becoming frustrated because authorities were allegedly monitoring him. And during that frustration, he allegedly made a statement suggesting involvement. Ridge also said the witness had supported material, including dates, times, photos, financial records, ticket stubs, and handwritten communication connected to that relationship. He said he had passed his findings to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. That sounds significant. But this is where the episode has to slow down. A private investigator's claim isn't a charge. A witness statement isn't a conviction. And as of now, there's been no public arrest, no public charging document, and no official announcement that Jodi's case has been solved. That's the responsible way to handle it because Jodi's case has had rumors before. It's had names before. It's had theories before. Every time a new claim appears, the public wants the same thing her family wants: an answer. But an answer has to be proven. It has to survive scrutiny. It has to stand in court, not just in headlines. For now, the 2026 claim is part of the continuing story, but it isn't the end of it. Jodi Huisentruit is still officially listed as missing, and the case remains unsolved. Sometimes in a cold case, what didn't happen matters almost as much as what did. Jodi didn't vanish after a long drive. She didn't disappear from a remote highway. She didn't leave behind a note. Her car wasn't found miles away, and her apartment wasn't obviously staged as the center of the attack. Everything points back to a few steps between her apartment and her car. That's what makes this case feel so close. She was almost to work. She was almost inside her car. She was almost out of that parking lot. Then someone stopped her. If the attacker was waiting for her, then they waited through a delay because Jodi had overslept. She wasn't outside at her normal time, which means whoever took her may have waited longer than expected. That's risky. If the attacker didn't know her schedule, then the timing becomes strange in a different way. They encountered her in a quiet parking lot before sunrise and acted fast enough to take her without leaving behind the kind of evidence that solved the case. That's also risky. Either way, the person responsible took a major chance. They attacked a local television anchor at her apartment complex around the time she was expected at work, knowing that once she didn't arrive, people would notice quickly. And people did notice. The station noticed. Police were called. The investigation started that morning. But by then, Jodi was already gone. Closing Jodi Huisentruit's case doesn't need exaggeration. It doesn't need a conspiracy, and it doesn't need a monster created for the theory, because the facts are disturbing enough on their own. A young anchor was late to work. She answered the phone. She said she'd be right there. Her car was still outside. Her belongings were scattered around it. There were signs of a struggle, and Jodi was gone. That's the whole nightmare. Not a ghost story, not a legend, not something from a dark back road or an abandoned house. Just a woman in a parking lot before sunrise, taken in the narrow space between safety and routine. Until someone tells the truth, that parking lot in Mason City remains one of the most haunting places in American cold case history.